Welcome everybody to our webinar this afternoon. My name is John Peros. I'm the product manager for our PDM stuff over here at Hawk Ridge Systems. And the webinar that we're going to be doing this afternoon is called the Top 10 Features that Workgroup Users Wish For. The purpose of this presentation today, Workgroup PDM is the lower level PDM offering in the SOLIDWORKS product family. And we get a lot of feedback from customers as we're, talking to them on the phones through support or at events or whatever about features that those users really wish that Workgroup had. What I've done here is I've compiled a list of the 10 things that we get asked the most often for the most part. I didn't put them in any order or anything because it's hard for me to really track what gets requested the most, but this is just a really good general overview of, the things that people are asking for. Okay, so do a quick little introduction like I'm doing now, and then I'm going to go through the 10 things. You can see them all listed there. I won't read them off right now as we're going to go through each of those individually. But let me just point out a few more things before we get started. Workgroup is a great tool. Okay, I'm not here to say that Workgroup is a bad tool. Workgroup works very well for a lot of users who are having a lot of success with it. However, as times progress, Workgroup has a very limited architecture, and what we've found is that as people get more technological and designs become more sophisticated, they're looking for more from a data management system, which is why they're asking us for these things. So, unfortunately, SOLIDWORKS' current future outlook is that Workgroup PDM is going to be supported for a long time to come, but they're putting no development effort into it. And what that means for you guys that are Workgroup PDM users is that even though you're asking us for these functions to be added to Workgroup, it's just not going to happen because SOLIDWORKS isn't adding new features to Workgroup. So in this presentation, what I want to do is I want to mention these things that people are asking for. I want to mention any workarounds in Workgroup that may exist to achieve or sort of achieve the functionality that you're looking for. But what I'm also going to do is show and talk about how the Enterprise PDM tool can address the features that you Workgroup users are looking for. And something that I should mention is that SOLIDWORKS has a very excellent migration tool for moving from Workgroup to Enterprise. So if that becomes something that you're interested in, you don't have to worry about losing your data or losing your data integrity in Workgroup. It can be transferred right over into the Enterprise PDM system. Okay, so let's just go ahead and jump right into this. Okay, the first thing that I have right here is multi-site data access. And again, this goes into how technology and how engineering has progressed over the last couple of years, over the last 10 years or so. A lot of times we have outsourced design firms, be those design firms in the US or across in Asia or Europe. A lot of companies are starting to do this because of obvious reasons, including cost. Now, one of the big issues is that when you have collaborative engineering, and what I mean by collaborative engineering is multiple geographic locations working on the same files. So when you have that collaborative engineering, you want to be storing the files in one single source vault. The benefits of that are everybody's working off the same data, so you don't end up with outdated data. You don't end up with people making changes to the same file at the same time because they don't know what someone at another site is doing. Okay, you may also want to have access to an engineering vault when you're not in your office, right? You may go out to customer sites a lot of the time, and you might want to access engineering drawings when you're at a customer site. You may also want to share your engineering data, maybe at least your drawings, with customers and vendors. These are all things that have become very prevalent since Workgroup PDM was started, and they're just not things that Workgroup PDM does very well. Now, there's a couple things that you can do in Workgroup to try and make this work. The first thing is to set up a VPN, right? So if you have people off-site outside of your main facility where the Workgroup vault is, You can certainly give them access through VPN, and in using VPN, they can use the Workgroup PDM Vault. What you got to understand is that VPN is typically very slow. It's much, much slower than having an actual LAN connection. So just be aware that when people are checking files out and in of the Workgroup Vault through a VPN, it's going to be much slower than you're used to. You can also do this for people who are off-site, right? If someone goes off-site a lot, as long as they have an internet connection, you can give them a VPN and they can come into your vault. The other option in terms of if you want to share data is to just use an FTP, right? Workgroup really doesn't have a fantastic way to share data to people like customers and vendors. So if you want those people to be able to see your files, you have to go a more traditional route and use email or FTP or the processes that you're probably got in use right now. So it's not really a lot of good workarounds for Workgroup in terms of this particular thing. So the question then is, how does Enterprise PDM help? Well, the best thing is that Enterprise PDM has built into it a process called replication. Replication is this really fantastic tool that will allow you to synchronize servers at multiple locations. So the thought process behind this is you have data servers at each location, and those data servers become synchronized at scheduled points during the day. They also become synchronized on demand if necessary. And so what happens is if you're at one of these off-site locations, or I should say off-main site locations, you have a server there with all the data on it. So when you access the files, instead of using a VPN and trying to go to the main site, you're using the LAN and you're going to the local server. There's obvious speed benefits there in being able to go to a local server instead of having to use a VPN. The other benefit is that even though you have these replicated servers, there's one brain, so to speak, controlling all those servers. For those of you who don't know, Enterprise PDM is controlled by Microsoft SQL Server. That acts as the database brain behind the tool. So even though you have multiple servers at multiple sites, there's just the one brain in use, so it knows if you're in India and you check a file out, well, it's not going to let people in California check that file out because someone in India has it checked out. So it's almost as if you're all working in the same office, even though you're distributed across multiple locations. Okay, the other thing that Enterprise PDM has is a real web server. Okay, and the web server allows you access through Internet Explorer to the data stored in the vault. So what you can do is you could set up specific folders for customers or vendors, and you could let the customers and vendors only have access to their folder, which would allow them to download the latest versions of drawings, the latest versions of PDFs, the latest versions of IGES files, whatever it is you're sharing with them, they can log into your site and download it. That way you don't have to keep track of what did I email them, what's on the FTP site, is it current. You don't have to manage that in multiple locations like you may be doing today. So very, very cool tool there. This next slide is just a little overview of how the replication works. It's kind of basically what I talked about. Just to point a few things out, when we use the term archive server, we simply mean a data center, where actual physical files are being stored. And then you'll notice that there's only one database server. That's the one single brain that we're talking about. That's the SQL server that would be operating at the main site. And that's just controlling all the 3 or however many data servers that you have. Okay? I got a question, and I want to go ahead and take a second to answer this real fast. I said earlier that Workgroup isn't going to be developed any further by SOLIDWORKS. And what I mean by that is definitely that Workgroup is not getting any enhancements. Workgroup is definitely going to be supported for many, many years to come. So even though SOLIDWORKS is not adding any enhancements to the tool, they're not cutting the tool off either. They're going to keep releasing it every year with the new version of SOLIDWORKS. It's just not going to have any features. If I had to say that there was a replacement for it, it would be Enterprise PDM. But again, remember, Workgroup is still going to be around for many, many, many years to come. There is no plans to sever it right now. It's just not going to have any new functionality year after year. Okay, so let's go to our next point. Okay, the next point is better communication with other systems. And again, this is something that's become more and more popular as software has become cheaper and technology has become cheaper. Companies have more systems in place than they did 10 years ago. And what I'm really talking about is ERP, MRP, PLM type systems. That's a lot of acronyms. I would imagine most of the people attending this webinar today have at least one of those systems in place. And these manage things like inventory, the planning process for manufacturing, item masters, engineering change processes, all sorts of stuff depending on what system you have. And what a lot of people want is they want their PDM tool to be able to communicate with their ERP, MRP, PLM type system. Okay? And there's a couple major things that we get asked for. The first is to do an automatic bill of materials transfer. When you have a big SOLIDWORKS assembly that you're about to release, that bill of materials likely needs to go into your ERP type system. Okay? Most people, unfortunately, are doing that by hand. They're spitting out an Excel spreadsheet, giving it to their dot control person who's adding that into the other system. That's a very tedious process, and if it could be automated somehow, a lot of people would really like to see that. The other thing is the automatic transfer of PDF files. So what most companies are doing is that when they release a product, when they release a drawing, they create a PDF file of that drawing, and that PDF really becomes the control document. That's the drawing that you give to vendors, that's the drawing that you give to customers, that's the drawing people can get from your website. And typically those files exist in your global enterprise-wide system, your ERP or MRP, whatever it is. Okay? If we could automatically generate and automatically transfer those PDF files into another system, that would again be a huge time saver. The third really big thing that we get asked for a lot in terms of this is, hey, my ERP system is generating part numbers. I want to use those part numbers on my SOLIDWORKS files, but right now I have to go into the system, get a part number, then start a SOLIDWORKS file, then name my SOLIDWORKS file. Is there any way we could automatically pull that information into SOLIDWORKS so I don't have to go into both systems? Okay. Now, in Workgroup, there are a couple workarounds for this. If you have a SOLIDWORKS file, SOLIDWORKS drawing, and that drawing has a BOM on it, you can take that BOM and you can save it as a CSV. Okay, so by saving that BOM as a CSV file, you could give that to your planning people or whoever need it, and it's possible, based on the system that you have, that that CSV file could be imported. So that has nothing to do with Workgroup. You can do that just straight out of SOLIDWORKS, but that's one of the workarounds that you may want to look at. In terms of PDF files, Workgroup has the ability to store and create PDF files. The problem is when it creates those PDF files, they're in the Workgroup vault. They get created in the Workgroup vault. If you wanted to take those PDF files and export them to a different system, you could write a custom program that can go into the vault and grab those. And so what you have to be aware of with Workgroup is that it does have a fully open API. So if you understand Visual Basic and you understand programming, you can write custom programs to augment the capabilities that Workgroup already has. And this is one of those times that you may want to look into doing something like that. Okay? The other thing is you could write a custom program to pull part numbers into SOLIDWORKS files. So for instance, you go into SOLIDWORKS, you do File New, it creates a new part. You could have a program execute at that point that would go into the ERP, MRP type system and pull a part number out for you. Okay? If you do that, again, it works inside SOLIDWORKS. It's not going to have anything to do with Workgroup, but that would be a good workaround to accomplish that. Now, how does Enterprise help with this? Okay, well, the first thing is that Enterprise PDM has the built-in ability to export BOMs in what we call the XML format. And you can think of the XML format as a very intelligent text file. And that XML format is pretty much the universal language that ERP, MRP, PLM systems use in terms of importing files. So the way that this typically works is an event would happen in Enterprise, such as you were releasing a drawing for production, or whatever you call that event. The bill of materials from that drawing would be taken, exported as an XML file, placed into what's called a spool folder, which is like a temporary folder, and then the ERP, MRP, PLM system would grab it from that spool folder and import it automatically so that you don't have that manual process anymore. And so the export of that is fully automated inside Enterprise PDM, doesn't need any user interaction to make that happen. Okay. Enterprise PDM can also automatically generate PDF files from your SOLIDWORKS files, and as it's automatically generating those files, it can place them anywhere you want it to place them, which is either in the Enterprise PDM vault or outside of the Enterprise PDM vault. So again, in theory, you could save that PDF file out to that spool folder and have your ERP, MRP, PLM system import that file automatically. Again, requiring no import from the users. Now, what's interesting about Enterprise PDM over Workgroup is that it actually has serial numbering built in. And so I'm going to deviate from my PowerPoint for a second just to show this. But I'm in the Enterprise PDM administrative tool right now. And what you're going to see is that I have a little node called serial numbers. And I can create as many serial numbers as I want. Now, serial numbers in Enterprise PDM are numbers that bump by 1 every time and maybe have a prefix or a suffix. So for example, I've got a drawing number that's SW-1 and then a 5-digit number that bumps by 1 every time. I've also got an ECO number that's ECO- and a 5-digit number that bumps by 1 every time. So you can have prefixes, suffixes, and a number that bumps by 1 every time somewhere in there. So this is what we call unintelligent or semi-intelligent numbering. Now, if you have an intelligent numbering system that includes multiple different versions of numbers based on user input and other things, that is something that Enterprise PDM is not going to be able to do out of the box. But a lot of times if you have that kind of system set up, you've got something driving it, like an ERP, MRP type tool. So if you have an intelligent numbering system being driven by another tool, you can write a custom program to connect that tool to Enterprise PDM. So Enterprise PDM has the same open API that Workgroup does. But in this case, instead of writing a custom program to connect the part numbering tool to SOLIDWORKS, you could write a custom program to connect the part numbering tool to Enterprise, which would be a little bit easier, and then Enterprise can push those numbers to your SOLIDWORKS files. So the other thing that I should show here is that if I open up SOLIDWORKS, and forgive me if this takes a minute here, sometimes my computer's a little bit slow, but in SOLIDWORKS, you can actually set up criteria of how files get named. So I've got this Enterprise PDM dropdown right here. If I go to my options, I can say, well, hey, look, I've got a tab down here for part assembly and drawing files. How do I want to name them? Well, I'm going to name the parts files with the part serial number, the assembly files with the assembly serial number, the drawing files with the drawing serial number, or any serial number that I choose to pick, right? In this case, we're actually not naming drawings because I don't have any of the checkboxes turned on. So the drawing's just going to take the name of the part or the assembly. So you can set up SOLIDWORKS to automatically name files based on what you're doing inside of the vault, which is a very nice functionality that Workgroup doesn't have. So if you can connect your intelligent part numbering system to Enterprise, Enterprise can then push those intelligent part numbers into your SOLIDWORKS files. Okay, so let's look at our next one here. The next one is more flexibility with folder names. This is a small one. It's a pretty simple one. In Workgroup, you cannot have two folders with the same name, even if they have different parent folders. Okay, so this is really just a limitation in the architecture of Workgroup. And the example that seems to be clear for me is, say that you make slot machines for casinos, right? And the Win is your customer and the MGM Grand is your customer. And you have a top level folder for both the Win and the MGM Grand. Well, what you'd like to have underneath of those two folders is a folder for the year so that you can track the projects you did for them that year. So a 2011 folder and a 2011 folder in the other one. Well, Workgroup's not going to let you do that because you would have two folders named 2011, and that is against the rules in the Workgroup system. So what you have to do as a workaround is you would have to somehow distinguish those subfolders. So the example I give is you have a parent folder called Win, and the subfolder is Win 2011. And then you have a parent folder called MGM Grand and a subfolder called MGM Grand 2011. It's certainly not the end of the world to have to do it that way, but it is definitely annoying, and it's some flexibility that Workgroup users would like to have. Now, how does Enterprise PDM help with this? Well, Enterprise PDM is completely based on Windows Explorer, so it doesn't have any of those folder-based limitations that the Workgroup tool has. You can create subfolders that have the same name in Enterprise. The same way you could do it is if you created subfolders with the same name on your own hard drive. That's not a limitation inside Enterprise PDM. What Enterprise PDM can also do is it can create folder structures as a template. So for instance, if you had a new project, you could run a project structure template and it would create all the top level folders and subfolders based on a routine that you've typed in, so that you have consistency across your projects. And so these are just, two little things that I'd like to show here. For those of you who haven't seen the Enterprise PDM interface, I apologize for not giving a better introduction to it. We have some really nice recorded webinars on our website that show the interface, and so if you went there, you could definitely watch those and get a better intro. But just to show off this functionality here, I'm accessing the Vault through Windows Explorer. I don't have to be in SOLIDWORKS to access Enterprise PDM. And you can see here that in my engineering folder, I have a couple different projects. Okay, no matter which project I go into, Project 2012 has a certain set of subfolders, and Project 2018 is going to have the exact same set of subfolders. So I can have folders with the same names wherever I want as long as they're subfolders. And then in terms of the template, if we go back to our engineering folder, say that I want to create a new project, I can go ahead and right click, New. I've got a, oh wow, you know what? I don't have it in here anymore. I don't quite know what happened there. But theoretically, I could have a template here that would actually create the top level folder and all its subfolders. So through the Enterprise PDM admin tool, you've got this little thing called templates, and oh, there's my project structure. I may just not have permissions to this. Yep, that was it. Okay, so let me show this one more time here. If I'm in my engineering folder, I do a right click New. I can create a project structure. It should theoretically create Project 2022. It's going to ask me for some information, what's the project name, all that stuff, if you want to fill it information for it. And there we go. Project 22 folder is created, as well as all the subfolders. That's just going to help you with consistency as you're moving forward through all these projects. Okay, so I believe we're through 3 of these things right now. So I'm just going to take a minute to rest my voice for a second and see if anybody has any questions. Like I said, you can type them in that question and answer pane, and they will shoot right over to me, and I can go ahead and answer those. If I'll wait about 30 seconds here, if there's no questions, I will just keep on going. Hopefully this is good information for everybody, just trying to point out as much of this workgroup stuff as we can and provide workarounds. A lot of this stuff is things that we see on a day-to-day basis, so I'm assuming it's stuff that you workgroup users are seeing as well. Okay, well, it doesn't look like there's any questions, so I'm just going to keep plugging through this. Next one I've got on here is more flexibility with revisions. Okay, so it used to be very common to have just an A, B, C, D, E, F, G type revision scheme. But again, as engineering has become more process intensive and more complex, people have really started to change the way they think about revisions. And one of the things that we see a lot is an engineering revision versus an actual production revision. Something like as it's in the engineering, it would get an X1, an X2, an X3, an X4. Then when it got released for production, it would go to an A. Well, if that production release needed changes and it came back to engineering, it would be an X5, an X6, an X7. Then it would get released to production and it would be a B. This is unfortunately something that Workgroup can't accomplish. Now, the other thing that we get asked a lot is to have different revision schemes for different types of files. Okay, so say you had multiple customers and your customers use different rev schemes and you wanted to maintain their rev schemes, could we do that? Workgroup really can't. It can only do one rev scheme for everything that's in the vault. Okay. Now, there is a small workaround in Workgroup that you can use, but it's for very, very specific instances. And I'm going to bring up the Workgroup admin tool here for a second just to show this. So you guys are probably all familiar with the Workgroup PDM admin tool in here. But, the Workgroup PDM has, let's see, make sure I can remember my password here. Workgroup PDM has this thing called sequential revisioning. And sequential revisioning will allow you to have multiple revision schemes. So if I go to my revision scheme tab here, you can see I've got 3 columns: primary, secondary, and tertiary. By default, the way that Workgroup PDM handles these is that it conglomerates them. So in the case that I have right here, it would be a -01, a -02, a -03, then an A01, A02, A03, so on and so forth. If you turn this little box on down here at the bottom for sequential revisioning, what that will do is it will treat these columns as independent entities. So it would go through the primary column first, then when it was out of the primary column, it would move to the secondary column. So my primary column could be X1, X2, X3, X4, X5, and then my secondary column could be A through Z, so that when it finished with the X column, it could move over to the ABC column. The problem with this type of revisioning is that you can't go backwards. This is the big caveat right here. So if you left the primary revision column for a document to move on to a secondary revision, you can never go back and use the format that was in the primary revision column. This works for some people in certain circumstances, but that's a big thing to be aware of. So just make sure that if you're using sequential revisioning, you're not anticipating having to go back to an older revision scheme. Okay, now, how does Enterprise PDM deal with this? Well, Enterprise PDM can use as many revision schemes as you want. So there's no restriction on revision schemes in the Enterprise PDM tool. In Enterprise PDM, we have these things called workflows, Workflows are our scripted electronic processes of how a document progresses through a company. And at any point in that workflow, you can use any revision scheme or combination of revision scheme that you want. And this also gives you the flexibility to move back and forth between revision schemes. So if you went to an A and needed to go back to the XRev scheme, you can absolutely do that in Enterprise PDM. What it can also do is it can segregate different types of files into different workflows, and that would allow you to have different revision schemes for different types of files. Say you want a certain rev scheme for your Word documents and you want a completely different revision scheme for your SOLIDWORKS files. That's something that you can accomplish in Enterprise. And just to give a quick little update here, this is what a workflow looks like in Enterprise. We'll talk about these a little bit later, but these, like I said, are those scripted processes, and any one of these yellow states, which correlate to document statuses, can use a different revision scheme if necessary. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about how your rev schemes work. Now, next thing that we have here is probably what I would call the #1 request if I was going to assign numbers to these things. And that is better performance and stability. Like I said in the beginning, Workgroup is a great tool. The problem with Workgroup is that it's built on a very, very old product architecture, and because of that, it has a lot of limitations in performance. So what you see, especially as you start to add more and more and more documents to the vault, is that it's going to slow down. Your performance is going to get gradually worse over time the more things that you place into the vault. Now, this affects users most often in the areas of searching for documents and checking in and checking out documents. That's where we get the most reports of slowness from the users. Unfortunately, this is what it is with Workgroup. There's not a lot that can be done to solve it. Now, there are a few tweaks that you can make to optimize the Workgroup system to keep it running as good as possible for as long as possible, but eventually it's just going to continue to slow down. I suggest that anyone who's interested in increasing the performance of Workgroup, they go to our website under the Events tab under Recorded Webinars. I did a webinar last year called Workgroup Warning Signs. That webinar has a PowerPoint that you can download, and it has a lot of information on trying to optimize the performance of Workgroup and things that you can do to keep it from slowing down. So if you want a little bit better information on how to set that up, please go and download that webinar and that PowerPoint. It will be very helpful. In terms of Enterprise, I guess I got to give a little backgroup on Workgroup here and why Workgroup slows down. Workgroup doesn't have a database behind it. So the way that Workgroup manages data is that when you put a file into the Workgroup system, it creates a couple text files that go with that file. And every time you create a revision of that file, you get a couple more text files that go with every revision. So what Workgroup ends up doing is accessing all these text files. So when you check out an assembly with a bunch of parts, well, Workgroup has to open all those text files on the server into RAM so that it can access and write to that data. Okay? As you can probably tell that as you start opening more and more stuff and storing more and more stuff in the vault, these text files are growing exponentially in terms of the number of files you're putting in the vault. That becomes a problem because Workgroup is only supported in 32-bit environments, so it can really only access 2 gigs of RAM at a time. And these text files add up fast in terms of how much memory they take. So what you'll notice is that someone will have a large assembly open, and then the server will have to do something, and it can't because it's out of RAM, and then it crashes. Or it takes just a long time to load all these text files, which is why you have slow check-in, check-out, and searching. Okay? The way that Enterprise solves this is by having a database. It's completely driven by Microsoft SQL Server. So instead of having all these little text files, we have a database. And the database's sole job is to store and retrieve information in the quickest way possible. So, I could do a little example here. If I go into my enterprise PDM system, I'm going to run a search. Okay, and what I want to do is run a search for basically everything in my vault. I want to find every single file in the vault. I think I've got like 2,500 files in the vault. Okay, there we go. It found 2,520 files and 437 folders in 3.1 seconds. That is what SQL does. This same search would have taken significantly longer in a workgroup environment, and the more data that you have in the workgroup environment, the exponentially longer it's going to take. So without getting into like the architecture of what a database actually does, I don't think I could explain it much better than that, but trust me, having a database in the background significantly enhances the performance and the stability of the system. And that's also increased by the fact that Enterprise is supported in 64-bit environments, so it can go through there and it can access as much RAM as your server has. So, see our next one here, email notifications. This might be number 2 on my list of what people ask for the most. This basically comes to 2 things. I take a file, I submit that file for approval. I want someone to get an email that file is waiting for approval. Pretty simple, right? I mean, you would think that most data management systems would be able to handle that. The other situation is that I'm very interested in a file and I want to follow it. Say that I'm not in charge of making changes to a specific file, but that specific file is something that I'm using in my assembly right now. Well, I want to know when that file gets checked in or checked out or when its status changes so that I can go check and see if that's going to affect my assembly. I want to really be able to follow what's happening with that file. Those 2 things are something that Workgroup can't do either at all or out of the box. Now, the workaround here for Workgroup, and I really should have left my Workgroup admin tool open. Let's just show this again for a second so that I can make clear to everybody what's going on here. Oops, I opened the wrong program. Okay, so with Workgroup, the admin tool here, you're going to see a tab called Triggers. Now, if you're using the Microsoft messaging queue, you might have seen that as MSMQ or something like that, I think is what they abbreviate it as. If you turn these notifications on, basically what's going to happen is Workgroup can use that Microsoft messaging queue and it will send out triggers when certain actions happen. So if you bump revision, it'll send out a trigger. If you change document status, it'll send out a trigger. If you do a check-in, it'll send out a trigger, so on and so forth. Well, you could write a custom VB program that will listen for those triggers, and when it sees one of those triggers, it will do something. For instance, send an email. However, you have to have MSMQ on, and you have to be able to write a program that can do what you want it to do. So it's going to take quite a bit of custom stuff in there to actually make that happen. Let's see, cancel that. Okay, now, how does Enterprise help with this? Well, Enterprise actually has built-in notifications, okay? And these notifications are built around 2 different things. They're built around the workflow, and they're built around the files. So I'm going to show you the 2 different types of notifications here in Enterprise. Again, I'm going to use this workflow in my admin tool as an example. Now what this workflow is, the yellow boxes are statuses. Those are the steps that the file goes through. The blue boxes are what we call transitions, which is how a file gets from one stage to the next. So the blue boxes are where we can send out notifications. So for instance, over here, a file is going to get approved. We'd maybe like to send some emails out to the company that file is going to get approved. So if I go to the property or the notification box on the transition, I can essentially come through here and I could choose different users if I wanted to notify users individually. Or I've got a group, you know, I want to send a group notification. Maybe I want to send a group notification to everybody. I can go ahead and notify everybody in a particular group. And they're just, when that happens, they're just going to get an email. That the system just sends it out. Doesn't require any user interaction. This actually gets a little bit better though, because instead of just globally notifying people, you can actually let the user choose who he or she may want to notify. So in this case, when I submit a file for approval, well, when I submit a file for approval, I probably just want to notify my boss. I don't want to notify everyone in the world. So if you come into the notifications here, what I've got is a notification on the management group, and we can actually call that dynamic. When you click that dynamic checkbox, what that means is that it's going to provide the user with a list of all the people in that management group, and they can choose to notify whomever they want. Okay, so that's just two of the ways you can do notifications through the workflow here in Enterprise PDM. Now the other way to do notifications is kind of what we talked about before in terms of following a file. So if I go in here, you know, I'm working on my assembly, but there's this file right here is really important to me for whatever reason. Okay, if I right click on that file, I have this little notify option, and that's going to be able to say notify me when the file's checked out, notify me when the file's checked in, notify me when it goes to a certain state, notify me when it leaves a certain state, or notify me when, and I could set up a custom combination of those different options to choose when I want to get notified of something that happens to this document. So that way, if someone checks it in, checks it out, does something to it, I just get a little email notification in my Outlook that tells me that happened and I know what's been going on. Okay? All these documents obviously have history and stuff associated with them, so if you don't want to be notified, you can look at the history, but you know, getting notified is something that's important a lot of times. Now, I had a question come in while I was doing this that I wanted to tackle real fast. The question was, so you can never run PDMWorks Workgroup on a 64-bit system. That's not quite true. You can run Workgroup on a 64-bit system, but Workgroup will run emulated as a 32-bit program on that 64-bit system. So even if you run Workgroup on a 64-bit system that has 10 gigs of RAM, Workgroup itself will never be able to access all that RAM. It will only be able to access the 2 gigs of RAM because that's the limitation of the 32-bit program. So you definitely can run it on a 64-bit system. It's just going to run emulated as a 32-bit program. Just want to make sure that that's clear. All right, so we're getting through this here. Keep on chugging along. Next thing is better control of the SOLIDWORKS toolbox. Again, this is another one that we get asked a lot. For those of you who are out there using the SOLIDWORKS toolbox and using Workgroup, you probably know that it's not a good idea to put toolbox files into Workgroup. There's multiple reasons that it's not a good idea to do that, but you know, our recommendation if you were to call us is if you're using the toolbox and Workgroup, you want to leave those toolbox files on a shared network drive. And so, you know, really what people are after here is they want to have the toolbox locally to their computer because it's faster. If you have all your toolbox files stored on a network drive, well, when you go to pull them into an assembly, it's going to be slow because it's opening across the network instead of opening directly from your local hard drive. The problem is, if everybody has their own local version of the toolbox, nobody has a synchronized toolbox. Everybody's toolbox is going to be different. So you could really be duplicating effort and, you know, you're not sharing the same files at that point anymore. So the best of both worlds would be to have a local synchronized copy of the toolbox. Well, that's what Enterprise PDM does. Okay, because Enterprise PDM is Windows based, if we come in here and I was to look in my toolbox folder, well, I've got all these toolbox parts locally. Okay, but because they're in the vault, and you know that by a green folder, when you see a green folder here, you know it's vault controlled. Because they're in the vault, everybody has the same set. So if somebody goes and creates a new toolbox part, everybody else at the company is going to see that new toolbox part on their local drive. So you really have the best of both worlds here, and this is a huge performance boost for those of you people who might be using the toolbox. Now, just to kind of show what's going on here, I'm going to choose something like a heavy hex bolt, right? So if I look at this heavy hex bolt, Enterprise is telling me that I have one version of it in the system, which means it's really never been used before. It's just been sitting here. And so if we look at the data card, you can see some tabs up here, at, default, and preview config. Those are just the default configurations that an empty toolbox part will have. So if I go and I create a new version of the toolbox part, it's going to create the new version in my PDM database. It's going to create the new configuration, and then it's going to make that available to everybody else on their local hard drives. So just a quick way of how this works. If I have, I'm going to just go open up a blank assembly so that I can drop a toolbox part in there. The cool thing here is that the toolbox works exactly the same as it would work in terms of the interface, right? So just because it's stored in Enterprise doesn't mean it's any different. I can browse to my toolbox folder in my design library pane. Okay, and then I can go through, I want to do ANSI inch, I want to do bolts and screws, I want to do a hex head bolt. I think we were talking about a heavy hex bolt. Let's just make sure. Yep, heavy hex bolt. Okay, so I'm going to take that heavy hex bolt and drag it in. The configurator interface of the toolbox still works exactly the same. So I can come through here, and it's going to generate this bolt for me. It's going to ask me what size I want. Okay, half 13 is fine. I'd like to do that 2 inches long. We hit the check mark. And all in the background, without any interaction from the user, it's creating the new version so that everybody else knows that this version of the toolbox part has been created. So if I go back to my vault now, and I just refresh my vault view, we're going to see that version 2 is created now. And if we look at that data card, that configuration of half 13 by 2 by 1 has been created. The same thing happens if you want to go through there and you want to make changes. Okay, so you can come, you can edit the toolbox definition just like you're used to normally. I could change the length on this. No, it's actually got to be 3 inches long. Hit your checkbox. It creates the new configuration. That's okay. And it should go back through there and make a new version for us. Okay, so that's how the toolbox works. And when you store that in Enterprise PDM, like I say, you're getting the best of both worlds. You're getting the local performance as well as the controlled, synchronized toolbox across your company. So it works very, very well. I will put a little caveat out there. That only works with Enterprise PDM 2010 and greater. Since we're in 2011, probably not an issue, but something people should be aware of. Okay, next one here. Better control for non-SOLIDWORKS files. Now I know that most of us are engineers, and most of us deal with SOLIDWORKS files the majority of the time, but it's almost always true that there's never just SOLIDWORKS files. You've got Word documents, you've got PDFs, you've got PowerPoints, you've got Excel spreadsheets you use for calculations, maybe you've got MathCAD files, maybe you've got G-code files for your CAM system. There's always something other than SOLIDWORKS files, okay? And people want to be able to store that. You want to be able to put it into the vault, and you want to be able to track it and rev control it and know that it's safe and stored and sound. Now, you can do this in Workgroup. Okay, Workgroup will accept any file type that you want to put in it. The problem is putting it into the vault and pulling it out of the vault is very tedious. Okay, you have to start SOLIDWORKS Explorer. You have to do what they call a check-in from disk, which means that the file can't be open in a program. So you have to go into the program, save it, close the program, and then check it in. And then when you want to open that file again, you have to open SOLIDWORKS Explorer, check it out to get a local copy, and then go into your program and open it from whatever temporary local working folder you've copied it to. Okay? And that is not a very good interface. Now, Enterprise PDM, because it's completely built around Windows Explorer, it's going to store any file that Windows Explorer is going to store, which is anything. Okay? And because Windows programs use Windows Explorer to open and save files, you can open and save directly from the program without having to go through that extra step of SOLIDWORKS Explorer. Okay? Other things that Enterprise PDM can do for non-SOLIDWORKS files is it can tag them with metadata. So if you want to be able to search for them, you've got failure report documents or G code or whatever. You want to tag that with information like what part number it went through, who did it, what customer was it for, whatever. You can tag that information so that when you go to search, you're going to be able to find those documents through that metadata search. The other thing that you can do is you can attach non-CAD data to CAD data. So if this failure report went with part number 123, you could attach the failure report to the CAD file so that there's a parent-child relationship there. So just really quickly, let me demonstrate a couple things here. I'm going to go ahead and open up Word, just regular old Microsoft Word, right? I've got a failure report or whatever that's written in Word, and I want to go open that from the vault. So I just go File, Open. Because this is a Windows Explorer based utility, we go to our C drive, we browse into our little Vault Blueberry, and then I can go browse all my Vault folders right within this open dialog box. Okay, I've got some Word document sitting right here. I select it, I hit Open, it's at revision C, and there it is. That's how I open it in Word. Okay, very, very easy to do. And saving works exactly the same way. You go File, Save, you save it into the Vault, that's all you have to do. If I wanted to create a new document, oh, I didn't mean to close Word there. If I wanted to create a new document, I do it the same way, right? This is a test document. Okay, I've created my new document. I go File, Save. And again, this works with any Windows program. Doesn't have to be Word. I'm just using that because it's easy. Right? File, Save. Browse into my Vault. I want to save that in the engineering folder. We'll give it a name. We'll call it Word Test or something like that. Hit Save. Now it's into my Vault. That's all I have to do. It's absolutely no different than if you had the files stored on your local hard drive or stored on a server. Okay? Now I get a little notification that, hey, it's been added to the Vault. Okay? And if I go back into my engineering folder, we can see that that file has been added. I can check it into the Vault. And like I said, if this was a failure report or something that I wanted to attach to one of my SOLIDWORKS files, I can come find one of these SOLIDWORKS files that I want to attach it to. I just do a right click. I'm going to add references. Okay, I can browse to that Word document that I want to add. Hit OK. And what's going to happen right there when we let this thing refresh is that that SOLIDWORKS document will contain that Word document as a child. So now I always know that this Word document travels with that SOLIDWORKS document. Okay, and vice versa. If I was to go over and I was to look at the Word document, I could hit Where Used, and I could say, hey, it was driven by that SOLIDWORKS document. So you got a lot of flexibility here in terms of whatever types of files you want to store inside your Vault. Okay, and we've just got a couple more things here that we want to go over, just two more. More automation capabilities. So what do users want? They want automatic PDF generation. They want automatic neutral file generation, step files, IGES files, things of that nature. They want to do electronic document routing. They want to do automatic title block population. They want to do automatic bill of materials exports. All of these things that as an engineer you shouldn't necessarily have to be wasting your time on, these things should be automatic. Well, Workgroup doesn't have a lot of workarounds for this. I mean, it has a simulated electronic workflow which can simulate document routing, but it can't really generate any actions as you change from stage to stage. It can automatically create PDFs of drawings only, but when those PDFs get created, they're stored in the Workgroup vault. You'd have to write a custom program if you wanted to export them. Now, as for enterprise, all that stuff can be automated, okay? It can be automated through the workflow, or sometimes it can be automated through right-click menus. So I'm going to try to give a really, really quick example here of what's going on inside of enterprise, and I'm going to use a little drawing to push this point across. Okay, so I'm gonna take a drawing that I happen to have in the vault right now, and I'm just gonna actually roll it back for a second here to its old versions. Okay, and so what we see in the preview here is that this file doesn't have a revision appended to it yet, and it's got this little for reference only watermark. No revision in the title block, and no checker and checked date in the title block either. There is also this manufacturing folder, and I'm going to delete this PDF out of it. Okay, that should be a PDF of the release drawing, so we'll delete that out, and that PDF should automatically get recreated when I release this drawing. So as I go through here now, and I'm logged in as an admin, so I'm going to jump through some things that a normal person wouldn't be able to push through at the same time, but I'm going to take this file and I'm going to submit it for approval. And then I'm going to go ahead and basically approve my own file. But watch what happens to the preview when I do this approval. Okay, so we're going to change the state, say approved. And we got to put in our little password. So my preview of this file is going to get automatically updated. Okay, that watermark is gone because it's released now. Rev A is in the title block because it's released now. And who checked it? The admin checked it on 4/21. All that stuff gets filled in. What's also going to happen is that SOLIDWORKS is going to pop up down here at some point for just a little second, and it's going to actually create the PDF for us. And in creating the PDF, it's going to dump it into that folder, and all that stuff is going to get done in the background. So that all gets taken care of automatically. Do things like, there goes our PDF generation. You can do things like export bills of materials. You can create IGES files. You can send email notifications. You've got all sorts of options on what you want to automate through these workflow processes. Now, what's also available is sometimes you want to create a PDF or an IGES, and you don't want to have to push it through a workflow process. So you can do that too. I could take one of these files, I could right-click on it. I will have the option to create PDF or create IGES or create STEP or whatever neutral file format I wanted to create, and then it will be able to go and do that automatically as well. And if we go back and we look at that manufacturing folder right now, we should see that that drawing, well, it may not be there yet, sometimes it takes a couple minutes, but it'll eventually just dump that drawing right into the vault for us. Okay, so let's go back to this here. And we've got one last thing. So that was number 9. This is number 10 of the things that I had on my list. And that is going to be better management tools inside the vault. So what do users want? Okay, more granularity in terms of the permissions that we can set. Some sort of management dashboard type interface would be really nice in a lot of cases. And we want to have management be able to participate in approval processes without having a license of SOLIDWORKS installed on their computer, because that's how they would be accessing the vault. Okay, so Workgroup, without a database running behind it, it's really difficult to pull data out and create any type of management dashboard. You can do some little bit through custom programming, but it's going to be really slow just because it lacks that database, In terms of your management, your non-SOLIDWORKS users participating in the simulated workflow, they can do that if they have SOLIDWORKS Explorer installed with a Workgroup contributor add-in. So again though, that simulated workflow, nothing's triggering when you release a file. When they say approved, it's not putting their name in the title block necessarily, and it's not generating PDFs, and it's not doing all that stuff that Enterprise can do. That's why I call it a simulated workflow. How does Enterprise help with this? Well, obviously we've got SQL in the background. And having SQL in the background means we can create management dashboards, and we can run reports, and we can extract data like shown in the screenshot below. And this is a live report that I can run, right? So I can run this report through Internet Explorer. I've got a little report website set up. So if I go and I log into my report website, I could say, look, show me the status of everything in Project 1. Okay, well there's my report. In Project 1, I've got some files in the draft state, some files pending document control approval, and some files that are already released. And I could come down through here and I could browse into that as well, and I could see all the files that happen to be in each of those particular states. If I go into another project, well, I happen to know that this has actually some files also in pending engineering approval. Maybe I'm the manager who needs to approve those, what files are in that state. I can see how much stuff I've got to work with. This is feedback and information that's really, really, really hard to get out of Workgroup. But because we have the SQL database behind Enterprise, it's really easy to extract this kind of data. Okay. The other thing in terms of management tools is that Enterprise PDM has a much more granular system for setting up permissions. You got workflow permissions, folder permissions, administrative permissions, and Windows Explorer permissions and settings that can basically allow you to let someone see everything versus letting someone see only the released version of a file in a specific folder of a specific file type. So you can get very, very granular in terms of this. Plus, because it's a Windows Explorer interface, if I'm a manager and I don't have SOLIDWORKS, I can come through here using my Windows Explorer interface. I can find some SOLIDWORKS file and I can view all the information about it, right? I can get a preview. Previews can rotate, you can zoom in, you can zoom out, you can take measurements on things all through Windows Explorer, nothing special necessary. You can also come look at the data cards, which is the property, weight, cost, material, whatever properties you're putting in. So it's very, very easy for non-SOLIDWORKS users to interact with the same vault that the SOLIDWORKS users use. Okay? Basically now, that's the end though. Been through the 10 things. If you want to get in touch with us in terms of, support type questions or anything like that, all our contact information is right here.